Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Korra comic review. This is going to be my non-spoiler review for Runes of the Empire Part 1. So this is the first part of the second Korra comic series. The main change here is that we move from Irene Ko on art to Michelle Wong on art. Also, I should probably add up here that this is based on a review copy that I got from Random House, so just be aware of that. But as you guys know, I always give things a fair review, even if they get a review copy. So yeah, we're going to go non-spoilers here, not going to go too in-depth into discussing like the exact details, but I'll give you an idea about what the book is about overall. Though that said, I think the preview that we got way back when the book was first announced is I think still remains one of the most interesting parts, the actual bit of the early part of the trial that we get to see, but there's a lot more that happens here. So straight away I would say that this is just 10 times better than all of Turf Wars. Of the two books that I got here for review copies, Imbalance Part 2 and Runes of the Empire Part 1, I think this is definitely the superior book. There's just much more interesting things going on. There's a lot more to discuss coming out of this, and it really feels like this is the Korra comic we were waiting for, because I just feel like everything sort of comes together and it feels like, yes, this is the continuation of Korra that we were waiting for. All the characters just feel that little bit more in character. They're dealing with something really consequential in terms of just having Kuvira be the focus of what's going on. And then in terms of like the bigger kind of world kind of building picture, the idea of kind of democratic elections in the Earth Kingdom, they finally get to kind of addressing that stuff, and that becomes part of the plot point here. It's just, this is the continuation of Korra that we needed, and it feels like it took them a book, but they're finally here. And I think the biggest strength of this book is just that every time Kuvira is on the page, it is so interesting. You are wondering what has changed about her, what she's thinking, what her aim is, what her goal is. And you are kind of questioning, like, okay, like she's hinting at bits of her backstory here, but is it just her and the way she is interpreting that backstory in a very negative way to almost make herself come across as the victim, or is it just a problem that she's always had, that she's never been able to sort of open herself up to people? Because the biggest thing you get, and you saw it in some of the preview pages, of just, Sue says, I gave you a home, like you were treated like part of the family, and Kuvira counters that and says, no, I never felt like part of the family. And there's a few other times in the book where she says stuff similar to that. We never get the full explanation. In this Part 1, we don't go far enough into her backstory to get to see what that dynamic is like, but they're definitely teasing that we probably will, and that will probably come as Su-Yin begins to play a bigger role in the story. Here it's just these early sort of seeds of what is post book 4 Kuvira like. We know she's already that little bit different because of the way she was in that final scene with Korra, when she blocks the spirit beam and they're in the spirit world, and you see just a lost, like terrified kind of Kuvira. She has her power is just gone when she's in the spirit world. She's just so not comfortable there. And she surrenders because she sort of realizes that Korra has this power she can never hope to achieve. And when you get that little hint of her backstory in the show, it's interesting because in this book what you'll see is that Kuvira is going to talk about how she's changed from who she was as the person who ran the Earth Empire. But you are asking yourself the question the entire time. I'm not exactly seeing everything about that change. Like, she's changed a bit, but to the level she's talking about, I'm not quite seeing it. And it all really comes back to the fact that, like from the preview that we saw, she says not guilty at the trial. And you're asking yourself, like, what is she hoping to accomplish? She explains it in that scene that, of course, she doesn't want to just go down as just the villain, when she actually did accomplish a lot of good stuff. That there was a lot of good intent in there as much as she did all this wrong stuff. And she's not, I definitely get the impression she's not saying not guilty to think that she's going to get away with all of that, but she wants it to be in the records that she did good as well as bad, and that she has changed for the better now, and that will, be her attempt to sort of redeem herself. And that's sort of what we get here over the course of the book. Without spoiling things too much, I think most people probably could figure it out, but the idea is that once they see that the threat of Commander Guan, who's leading the remnants of the Earth Empire army, he's coming back into play as the elections are kind of looming, they go to Kuvira to ask for her advice on how to handle Guan. What is he like? What is he like compared to you? And her suggestion on how to deal with him, given that she presents the idea that he is a little bit of a ticking time bomb, he is a good strategist, but he's got a bit of a short fuse, she feels that she is the only way to basically deal with him. So they sort of manufactured this deal where they're going to bring Kuvira with them to deal with Guan. And so it's this sort of, they sort of have her in custody, they're watching over her, but they sort of also need her to be sort of free to get across the fact that she still has some power. And it's a very interesting dynamic as you get to see a more kind of casual Kuvira who's not really trying to do anything villainous. She's just seemingly trying to help and redeem herself, being seen to do something to help the Earth Kingdom, and that she very much seems to have the opinion that Guan as overall leader is not going to do anything to help particularly well. So just seeing her interact with the other characters, knowing all the bad stuff that she's done, and you do get that sense of just like, you say you've changed, but you don't quite get it. You don't quite get why everyone's being a little bit snippy and snapping at you about all of this stuff. That, like Sue says to her at the very start of the book, have you taken responsibility for everything that you've done? And there's a little bit of you saying, I don't think she has. She's changed in some way. She is different, but has she taken full responsibility for everything that she's done? I don't think so. And what's going to lead to that? I think it's so fascinating. As for backstory, like I said, you don't get too much of it here, but you get a little hint. There's literally just 2 pages of young Kuvira in this book. And obviously we know from teases that there's going to be more in part 2 and 3. And they give very little context to it. It's just her thinking, those 2 pages happen, she comes out of it, and you're not really sure what to make of that little bit of backstory, because they don't give you any context to who the other characters in the little bit of backstory are. It's just, she thought about it at this point in time, and it's the cool thing of them basically asking the audience who's reading the book, what do you think about what's that? Why is she thinking about that at this point in time? And I thought that was really, really interesting. So Kuvira is a huge highlight of this book. I treat it similarly to the way Ursa is done in The Search, but I think The Search definitely goes more in depth on Ursa, in that even part 1 they gave you a pretty substantial part of her backstory. Here they're more holding back on it, but she's still interesting just by itself. And the difference here is that book led with the idea that early on they're not showing you Ursa in the present, it's just showing you her backstory, whereas we actually have Kuvira here in the present, and it's more when will we get to the backstory. So it's definitely similar to that in terms of just a character people care about, people want to know more about, and they're committing to doing something important with that. Similarly, you get some Prince Wu here, of course, or King Wu as he technically is now, and him as he's dealing with organizing some of this transition into having these democratic elections. And I think they got towards the end of book 4, they found a nice balance for Wu in terms of not overdoing him, because he can be sort of annoying if he's on a bit too much, and acknowledging the development that he's had, and that he's developed into a pretty, I suppose, conscientious leader who cares about the people and wants to do this good thing that will help the Earth Kingdom going forward. So I think they use him well, and that it makes sense for him to be part of this. You see him and Zhu Li as the new president talking, and she's fit into her role very nicely. And so just the interaction of like the new sort of newer world leaders is nice, and the the improvement of just Korra interacting with like the authority now that, you know, the president is not this antagonistic figure to her who just gives her no credit, and then she's actually friendly with her, is such an improvement of just Korra wants to do something that's seen as like a little bit rash, and Julie's just like, okay, you've explained it to me pretty well. I'll approve that. It's like, this is what we've been waiting for. It's just like, I'm so glad Raiko's out of the way, because he would just put up so many barriers before this plot would happen. So, little bits and pieces like that I think are really well done. Similarly, I think one of the weaknesses, especially in early Turf Wars, was just that Mako and Bolin were like rarely used, and even when they were used, there wasn't a lot going on with them, and it was mainly just a setup for pretty much just like one scene right at the end of Turf Wars. Here, even though they're not really the most important characters here, they at least, you know, they're there, they're part of the team, they're giving their opinion on everything, and it just feels like better what's happening here. Like the overall, all the characters, their interaction with each other, it all just kind of comes together nicer here, so well. So Mako's obviously in this very stable position as, you know, this up and coming police officer. Bolin, the position that he's in now, I won't go too much in depth on this, but like he's basically working for Julie. He's like Julie's assistant, basically assistant to the president. And they're once again setting up this idea that here he is doing something else, and he's pretty good at it, but it doesn't seem like he's going to stick with it. Mako sort of points this out, and at this point, I'm very confused as to what exactly direction they're going with Bolin. Of just, they're really hitting home the fact that like, you didn't commit to being an actor, pro bender, this, and this. What's going on here? I like that it seems to be a setup for something, but I'm not really sure what direction they're going in. But he, you know, obviously takes a break with this, with the whole Kuvira thing, to, you know, join the team as they kind of accomplish this mission. So he's on this temporary break from that role as, you know, Team Avatar sort of reforms to deal with Kuvira, and let's just monitor Kuvira basically as they deal with Guan. And what I like about it is like it was just fun to see the kind of characters interact a lot more, whereas it felt like Turf Wars like was so focused on Korra and Asami that it was just like, oh yeah, and we're also friends with Mako and Bolin, was just like such a side part of it. But here it's just great to see them all kind of interacting, and it just works better. Now the description for this book did say that like everyone will be on like opposite sides of the issue. They'd all have their own different opinion on Kuvira. And while that's true to a degree, it is not what you think. It's more of just, yes, everyone has their own opinion on Kuvira, but ultimately they're like, yeah, we're pretty okay with what's going on. It's not that people's different opinion on Kuvira is going to lead to fractures within the group, at least not yet. So I thought that was an interesting approach, and that I was almost like excited to see where they'd go with that, if like Asami was just like, no, I want nothing to do with this, whereas she's more just, I personally don't want to be around Kuvira, but if you feel she's important, fine. Little things like that, and just the interactions of just like, everyone gives their opinion on Kuvira, but they're not like, and leave me out of this for good, like we're not friends anymore type thing. It's not to that level. It's just getting across that Kuvira does divide opinion, but everyone sort of acknowledges that like, yeah, it makes sense to involve her in this to deal with Guan. I think, I suppose Guan himself, the best way to describe him is like, he's probably not as good of a leader in terms of charismatic, you know, leading from the front. He doesn't seem as powerful as Kuvira is, but he's found a way to kind of gain the loyalty of his troops, and he's basically developing himself into a bigger leader by basically saying, I'm going to be what Kuvira was, and I'm not going to surrender and back down like she did, and that's why you should follow me. So he's really getting into the Earth Empire kind of loyalist idea of things. He's also much more intelligent than you'd expect. There are aspects of like what Kuvira says about him that gives you the idea that he's so much of a hothead, as intelligent as he is, that he'd make some like silly decisions. But everything he's kind of doing up to now feels like, oh, he's thought a couple of steps ahead. He's really on to what he's doing. You think it's heading in one direction, and then like right towards the end, it's like, no, I'm ahead of you. This is what I'm going to do, and it's just this kind of surprise of like, wait, he can do that. And I, in that sense, like I think he's actually going to work out pretty well as a villain here. Of just he is the villain, of course, in what he's doing, and the Earth Empire, of course, the bad guys. But he's doing things the right way, and so what can they actually do to oppose him when he's not really breaking the rules or anything like that? So there's some fun things that I think are going to be very interesting to see just how it's all handled here. Yes, it's a bit political because we're dealing with, elections, individual elections in different states of the Earth Kingdom. Gao becomes the focus here, which of course is Toph's hometown. And that's the big kind of focus here, is that the first election is taking place in Gao. It's coming up very soon, so, here's the candidates. Voting's going to begin any day now. Well, let's see what happens. So I think in that sense it actually works pretty well. Korra Sami, very briefly, there are a couple of moments. It is not as big of a focus as, say, like Turf Wars Part 1. I don't think Turf Wars Part 2 or 3 really lent into doing too much Korra Sami themselves. This just feels like they've got to a point now where like they've developed a relationship. They're just a couple. When there needs to be, they'll have kind of coupley like moments, and there's a few moments like that, and it just feels kind of pretty natural. It's just incorporated there, and they're not kind of overdoing it or anything like that. So I thought it was pretty well done. I still, overall with Korra Sami, would say that like I think Asami still feels very underdeveloped. I'm still waiting for them to do something with her that's not just about her father in some way, and that even in this book, again, it's, I don't want to be near Kuvira because she killed my father, and it's like, in this case, like, it makes complete sense. That completely makes sense to be a valid reason, but it is another case of Asami doing something because of her father in some way. And I'm waiting to just get the individual thing with her specifically that isn't about her father's company, or, her father's back in her life, or this person did something to my father, and that sort of thing. I think you guys get the point I'm trying to make here, of just where's her own personality kind of arc and stuff like that coming from. So I think it's one of those ones where maybe there's not as much to discuss coming out of this book as you'd maybe expect, but it really sets the stage that over the course of Part 2 and 3 of Runes of the Empire, there is going to be some big reveals with Kuvira that I think are going to be very telling. It feels like they're really setting up a big kind of character arc, a big reveal, especially like since we know Su Yin is going to kind of come back into play because she's on the cover for Part 2. Seeing the interaction between Kuvira and Su Yin some more, and especially if they go into the backstory of what their dynamic was like when she was younger, that's going to be fascinating, I think. So I think this is, in that sense, this is an excellent Part 1 because it does sort of all the setup that you need of just having you ask all these questions about what's going on with Kuvira, what way am I meant to take her at this point in time. All the characters are here, they feel in character, they all have their own opinions on her, and as expected, Korra seems to be the sort of most trusting, the one most willing to give kind of Kuvira some leeway. How is that going to work out? Is Korra's sort of faith in a change Kuvira going to work out in her favor, and so on? So definitely an interesting book. I think the only thing I'd say is going into it is don't expect it to be the sort of reveal all about Kuvira. It's a first part, it's setting up the stage, and I think it does that really, really well. So I'm pretty much going to end it there. I don't think there's anything else I particularly need to say. Batar Jr. I don't think is featured in this book at all, which I assume maybe towards the end of part 2 or 3 that will come into play. Yeah. I will be doing a spoiler review for this book when the book is released, which is on May 21st. So expect to see that video that day, and then we'll also have a big podcast review discussing it in a lot of detail. So expect much more content about Ruins of the Empire Part 1. I wanted to keep it somewhat light here because it is the non-spoiler review. The book isn't out yet, but I also wanted to give a little bit of detail because there's a lot of preview pages out there. But yeah, very, very positive about this one. I'd say probably a really solid 9 out of 10 for this one. I think this is much more in line with the type of books I'm expecting from Korra and also Avatar with regards to just dealing with an important topic, really moving things on in terms of world building, in that the Earth Kingdom elections are an important thing to get done. And then you have Kuvira there as the important kind of character plot stuff going on. And then they're incorporating the other characters fairly well. And I think it's going to lead to something really, really nice. So that's pretty much been the video. If you have any questions about the book, definitely leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. And just in general, give me your thoughts on the video. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching and bye.